Henry VIII, born in 1491, was the second son of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. As a child, he was not expected to become king, a role destined for his elder brother, Arthur. However, Arthur's untimely death in 1502 changed the course of Henry's life forever. At just 17, Henry ascended to the throne, a young king full of promise and ambition, determined to secure the Tudor Dynasty's place in history. Henry's early reign was marked by his vibrant personality and love of sports, music, and learning. Yet, beneath the surface of his seemingly idyllic kingship lay a pressing concern: the need for a male heir. Henry was acutely aware of the instability that had plagued England during the Wars of the Roses, a series of civil wars that had ravaged the country just a few decades before. Without a male successor, Henry feared the Tudors could face a similar fate. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, a union intended to solidify ties between England and Spain, had been a strategic alliance. Catherine, a daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, had originally been married to Henry's brother, Arthur. After Arthur's death, a special papal dispensation was required to allow Henry to marry his brother's widow, a decision that would later haunt him. Despite their initial happiness, by the 1520s, it was clear that Catherine was unlikely to bear a son. The only surviving child of their union was a daughter, Mary. As the years passed and Catherine's pregnancies ended in miscarriages or stillbirths, Henry's frustration grew. His anxiety over the lack of a male heir became all-consuming, driving him to question whether his marriage to Catherine was cursed by God. Anne Boleyn's entry into the English court was a turning point not only in her life, but also in the history of England. Born to a well-connected noble family, Anne was educated in the Netherlands and France, where she gained exposure to the sophisticated culture of the European courts. She returned to England in the early 1520s and soon caught the eye of King Henry. Unlike many women at court, Anne was not content to simply become the king's mistress. She was ambitious, intelligent, and had a keen understanding of the political landscape. Anne knew that to secure her future, she needed more than the king's affection. She needed a crown. Her refusal to become Henry's mistress intrigued the king and fueled his desire for her even more. Henry's infatuation with Anne quickly grew into an obsession. He began to shower her with gifts and letters, expressing his deep love and longing. However, Anne was resolute in her demand. She would only be with Henry if he made her queen. This demand set Henry on a path that would lead to the most significant religious and political upheaval in English history. The king's desire to annul his marriage to Catherine and marry Anne faced significant opposition. The Pope, under pressure from Catherine's nephew, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, refused to grant the annulment. This refusal led Henry to take drastic measures, ultimately resulting in the English Reformation and the establishment of the Church of England. The quest to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon became known as the King's Great Matter. The situation grew increasingly complicated as Henry's frustration with the Pope's refusal to grant the annulment reached new heights. Catherine, for her part, remained steadfast in her role as queen, refusing to acknowledge any challenge to her marriage. Catherine's strong Catholic faith and her royal lineage made her a formidable opponent. She was deeply loved by the English people, who saw her as a pious and devoted queen. However, Henry's determination to have Anne as his wife and secure a male heir led him to break with the Roman Catholic Church, a decision that would forever alter the religious landscape of England. In 1533, Henry finally achieved his goal. He declared his marriage to Catherine null and void and married Anne Boleyn. The marriage was not without its challenges, as Anne was not universally accepted as queen. Many in England remained loyal to Catherine, and the legitimacy of Anne's marriage was questioned both at home and abroad. Anne's coronation in June 1533 was a grand affair, intended to solidify her status as queen. However, the celebrations were overshadowed by the growing discontent among the populace. The English court was rife with intrigue, and many viewed Anne as a usurper who had used her charms to manipulate the king. Anne Boleyn's position as queen was fraught with challenges from the very beginning. Despite the grandeur of her coronation, she faced immense pressure to produce a male heir. In September 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth, who would later become one of England's greatest monarchs. However, the birth of a daughter was a disappointment to Henry, who had desperately hoped for a son. The pressure on Anne intensified as the king's desire for a male heir became more urgent. Henry's initial passion for Anne began to wane, and their marriage was strained by both personal and political tensions. Anne's enemies at court, including supporters of Catherine of Aragon and ambitious nobles who saw her as a threat, began to conspire against her. Anne's assertive nature, once an asset in attracting Henry, now became a liability. She was increasingly portrayed as arrogant and ruthless, and rumors about her temperament and behavior spread rapidly. In 1534, Anne suffered a miscarriage, and in 1536, she lost another child believed to have been a boy. These tragedies further diminished Henry's affection for Anne and deepened his frustration. The king's wandering eyes soon turned to Jane Seymour, a lady-in-waiting to both Catherine and Anne, who was everything that Anne was not: demure, obedient, and seemingly submissive. Anne's position grew more precarious as Henry's interest in Jane Seymour intensified. By 1536, it was clear that Anne's days as queen were numbered. The king's ministers, eager to please Henry and eliminate a source of court instability, began to build a case against Anne. Charges of adultery, incest, and treason were fabricated, and Anne was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London. The trial of Anne Boleyn was a carefully orchestrated affair designed to ensure her conviction. The charges against her were shocking. She was accused of adultery with several men, including her own brother, George Boleyn, and of conspiring to kill the king. The evidence presented was flimsy, relying on confessions extracted under torture and the testimony of courtiers eager to see Anne fall. Despite the lack of credible evidence, Anne was found guilty of all charges. The sentence was death by beheading, a punishment reserved for nobles. On May 19, 1536, Anne was led to the scaffold within the Tower of London. She faced her death with remarkable composure, addressing the crowd with dignity and accepting her fate. Anne's execution marked the end of one of the most tumultuous and controversial chapters in English history. Her fall from grace was as swift as her rise, and the legacy she left behind was one of both tragedy and transformation. Anne's death cleared the way for Henry to marry Jane Seymour, who would finally give him the male heir he so desperately sought. However, Anne's influence would endure through her daughter, Elizabeth, who would go on to become one of the most celebrated monarchs in English history. Anne Boleyn's legacy is a complex one, marked by both triumph and tragedy. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would go on to rule England for 45 years, a period known as the Elizabethan era. Under Elizabeth's reign, England flourished, becoming a major European power with a thriving culture and economy. Elizabeth's strength, intelligence, and resilience were qualities she undoubtedly inherited from her mother, who had faced incredible adversity with grace and determination. Anne's story has been the subject of countless books, plays, and films, cementing her place in history as one of the most fascinating and controversial figures of the Tudor era. She has been portrayed as both a scheming temptress and a victim of political intrigue, a woman who dared to reach for the highest position in the land and paid the ultimate price for it. The love triangle between Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, and Catherine of Aragon remains one of the most compelling stories in history, a tale of ambition, passion, and betrayal that continues to captivate people around the world. Anne's life and death remind us of the dangers of power and the fragility of human ambition. Her legacy lives on not only in the history of England, but also in the enduring fascination with her story.